Welcome to More to the Story with Molly White, what the abortion industry doesn't want you to know. I am Mary Browning, and I'm filling in for a little bit here for Molly, who's having some technical difficulties this afternoon. But we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Dr. Stephen Hotze. He is hoping with the wellness in Texas, and he can help you if you need help. And he's good. He's a good person to turn to if you are in need of help. Please know that today we have a guest with us, Dr. Priscilla Coleman. She is with the International Institute of Reproductive Laws. She has a wealth of information, and we're excited that she's with us today. And so we say, come on, join us, Dr. Priscilla, and we'll see what you have to say today.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Whoops. There we go. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what the International Institute for Reproductive Laws is?
Sure. Well, we've only been in existence just under 2 years. It was a collaborative effort between Kaylin Carlson and myself. We've both sort of been involved in different ways with reproductive law, so more with the abortion topic, but our institute is broader. We consider various forms of reproductive laws. She's come at the topic from more of a treatment perspective. She has a personal history with an abortion and has told her story many times. So she's worked a lot on the front lines with women, helping out with hotlines. She's a trained counselor, and she's very motivated in terms of developing evidence-based treatment protocols and studying moral injury in association with abortion. I know she was on the show recently. I've sort of come at this from a different angle. I've been an academic researcher for 30 years. I recently retired a couple of years ago from Bowling Green State University, but I've published quite a bit. Probably over 60 journal articles, most dealing with abortion decision-making, risk factors for poor adjustment afterwards, and the various outcomes that we see over and over in the studies. The most well-studied outcomes are depression, different forms of anxiety, substance abuse, suicidal behaviors. And so I went from, I still am publishing, still actively doing research, but it's been on my heart for a very long time to take the scientific information that's available and reduce it without diminishing it. My goal has been to take rather sophisticated scientific data and get the key points and provide the references, because so much of what is done in society requires a scientific foundation. It's used in court. It's used as the basis of developing therapy programs and abortion recovery programs. It's so much. There's so much to learn from the women and the men and the families who have experienced reproductive loss. And so when we look at these scientific papers, we're learning about them as well, but with a different perspective, stepping back a little bit and looking at much larger numbers and for common themes. And so I really just wanted to figure out ways to get the information in a way that could be freely downloaded and used in whatever ways are needed, for teaching purposes, for counseling purposes, for women who are just trying to figure out what they want to do with an unplanned pregnancy. And so we've made quite a bit of progress. We have 15 fellows, highly accomplished lawyers and scholars and clinicians, OBGYNs who are now affiliated with us. And we're working on annotated bibliographies that address 4 forms of loss: abortion, miscarriage, stillbirth, and also loss to the birth mother during an adoption. And so these annotated bibliographies are summaries of the journal articles that are out there. They're easy to read summaries. and they're available free at our website. And I think at our last count, we probably have about 750 articles summarized. And so that's taking probably 15,000 pages of text and reducing it so that people can get a handle on what's out there on a particular topic. And what's nice about it being in like a Word document, you can just do a search. If you're interested, for example, in informed consent or adolescent or relationship outcomes, you can do your word search and find all the studies that address
And
those
is that
topics.
on your website
So,
then? Okay,
yes,
and I
it
think
is.
that's running across the bottom of our screen, but I want to say it for our listeners, the International Institute for Reproductive Laws, and it's at www.iirl.net, correct? Okay,
Yes.
very good.
Yes. And then we also have developed PowerPoint presentations that people can use for church groups, school groups, whatever training purposes they have. And the PowerPoints are based on the scientific information, but they also have a lot of women's stories interspersed to help the information sort of come alive so people can connect to it. And there's visuals, pictures, and so forth. But they may be expensive to reproduce. So we have taken the PowerPoints and created what we're calling research recaps that have the bulleted information, without all the graphics and stories and so forth, but the base information with the scientific sources behind them. And so this analyzing, synthesizing, and providing research to anyone who needs it is one of the primary goals. But we have many different prongs to the Institute, and be happy to talk more, or people can explore the website to see some of our other initiatives.
I just want to sort of underscore that if I would, there's Molly, she's joining us. Hey, hi, Molly. If there was a woman that was facing an unexpected pregnancy, could she go on to the Institute for Reproductive Laws and read some of this, maybe put in abortion or put in something and see what the stories are or the research is?
Yes, definitely. And another one of the other things that we offer is I stay on top of all the news, a lot of the news domestically and internationally. And so I pick some stories, and each month we'll post news stories that might relate to abortion statistics or cases, or it could be almost like a case study where just an event that occurred, a reunion, maybe after there was placement for an adoption, just appealing stories that come from decent news sources. So it's not just the academic information. We also stay on top of the news and yes, but a woman just considering an abortion can go and look at this material and see whether it's before or after an abortion. Ideally, they look at the abortion decision-making PowerPoints and other types of materials to realize the magnitude of what's involved there. And then also it should be helpful and and validating for women who are suffering after the procedure.
So another person that would be a therapist or a counselor that's working with someone that suffered a reproductive loss?
Definitely, because in mainstream training, the secular training, there isn't often there's almost never awareness that abortion can be potentially traumatizing. So it's therapists, psychologists often don't even have any background, and then they may be facing a woman who is horribly harmed by an abortion. So this can add to their repertoire of being able to treat women. And oftentimes what they may be seeing in a counseling session or even just with your general practitioner, there might be anxiety, depression, suicidal type behaviors, and the women may not feel free to disclose. And so they're kind of living in that world of private shame. And if therapists are aware that this could be a potential causal agent, then when they do their intake, they can ask about reproductive losses and provide a safe environment to discuss those issues.
That is so powerful. As you know, I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of women that have had abortion loss specifically. And one of the things
Right.
they mentioned is that it had for some of them, having had an abortion wasn't an issue that was either explored or thought to be problematic in the history of the world.
Right. Right.
I think that's
Right.
powerful.
That's definitely true.
I know Molly she's not on screen, but she's got a question for you, Dr. Coleman. She's typed it in. Her
Okay.
question is, can you talk about the biological aspects of fetal bonding that leads to trauma with pregnancy loss?
Sure. Well, very early in pregnancy, that both the mother's body and the baby's body are like biochemically interacting. There are connections that are physical and psychological that begin very, very early. And we know there were some studies that were conducted in Australia. These were women who were just in the first trimester, all were determined to have an abortion and ended up having one, but they reported these strong feelings of affection toward the baby that cognitively or rationally it didn't make sense to have them because they were not planning to keep the baby. So it was like the biological bond there was so powerful that they felt those maternal um, emotions, and they reported behaviors like rubbing their stomachs, daydreaming about what the baby would be like, and fully knowing they had no intention to, or they felt they were unable to keep the baby. So we know that the maternal fetal attachment begins early in pregnancy, and as the pregnancy develops, it gets stronger and stronger. And we know that women who have later term abortions are set up really for deeper suffering. The suffering from an abortion is great, no matter what time of what gestational age the pregnancy is or the child is. But we know that because of the mother's awareness is so much more dramatic when the baby is kicking, when she's physically the baby's larger and the presence can't be denied. And so the studies that have compared women who had an early abortion to those who've had a later term have shown very systematically that the women suffer even greater loss when it's further along.
Have you noticed differences between women that have suffered a stillborn or a miscarriage versus the abortion? Are there differences? Or
actually, initially, the reactions are rather similar in terms of anxiety, particularly. I know anxiety and depression were examined in some Norwegian studies. There was an author, Anne Broen, Broen, and she was interested in that very question. And so she followed these women for 5 years. So initially, the levels, the percentages of women that suffered from various psychiatric, illnesses or negative emotional responses were comparable. But then she followed them and reported at 2 years and 5 years. And by 5 years, those that had natural loss had pretty much assimilated the loss and had moved on and were not showing the signs of psychological distress. But the women who had had abortions, large percentages were still suffering. So it was almost as if the natural losses were obviously difficult. You lose a child in both cases, but they were able to resolve them more readily.
for the natural loss as opposed to the imposed loss kind of thing? Okay. The abortion versus the miscarriage or the stillbirth. Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also a lot more support now. When there's 30, 40 years ago, there wasn't very much support for women who experience miscarriage and stillbirth, but now there's more recognition. And so I think if we look overall in terms of what has been available to women who have suffered, there's quite a bit more for the natural loss than there is for quote unquote voluntary loss. But we know that so many of the abortions are not voluntary. They're out of pressure and coercion and so forth. But if we look at the faith community, then perhaps there is more available for women who've had abortion than a miscarriage, possibly, because there are so many abortion recovery groups now that are out there.
So in terms of the bonding with the mother, does that start at conception then, this chemical interaction? And
Well, I don't know that I can't think of any studies that have really looked that early. Most women don't even realize that they're pregnant until they miss a period or a little longer. But women report feeling very different early in pregnancy. Whether we call that bonding or not that's still kind of an unanswered question. But definitely well into the first trimester, there's reports of women, majority of women feeling some attachment to the fetus. And I think by the end of the pregnancy, there was one study that showed even in cases of unwanted pregnancy where women decided to continue to term, only about 8% by the end of the pregnancy were still feeling, like, I don't know how I can do this. I don't want to do this. The vast majority had come around to the idea of being a parent, or at least giving birth, possibly placing for adoption, and they were ready for it. So I think a lot of that shift has to do with the biology of attachment and bonding.
Okay.
And at birth, there's a dramatic increase also when women meet their babies and experience a lot of the different hormones that are operative at that point.
Beautiful. So you mentioned the birth mother. If I was pregnant and considering whether to relinquish my child for an adoption, could I go onto your website and look into adoption stories or birth mother experiences? Or
you definitely can. There isn't quite as much on them, and I've been actually interested in birth fathers because they often are not in the picture at all. They don't have any options there, and sometimes they may want to keep the baby, and if the woman decides to place for adoption, there's not much that the biological father can do. Looking at siblings as well. So the picture, I think, for women who place for adoption, there are lots of happy stories where they're blessed by the opportunity to give to provide a child for another family. But I think if you look at that literature sort of in totality, what seems to work best from the birth mother's perspective is an open adoption if that's what they desire. And many times they're young adolescents, and so if the adoptive family is able to not only take on the baby and nurture the baby, but provide some support to the birth mother, it's just like a beautiful story that can unfold there.
You raise a good point. That's one of the ways adoption has changed over the years, is including the ongoing contact with the biological mother.
Right. And there's so much research on adoptive families, and if we think about the triad, there's the parents, the adopted child, and the birth family. And traditionally, the birth family has been left out of the research. It's always, it's emphasized the adoptive parents and the adopted child. And there are reasons for that. Often they're socioeconomically disadvantaged, and they may not be able to be identified as easily and so forth. But so part of what we hope to do in the Institute is just provide a lot of support and care for those women who have, given the gift of life. They deserve a lot of respect and appreciation.
I am on a coalition, a national coalition related to what we call third option, to try to increase awareness about adoption. And we do have a birth mother as part of our panel, and the group is working through that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because as I was an adoption attorney for years, for decades. And so I've met a lot of beautiful birth mothers. but never thought
Yeah.
specifically about how much they might need support afterward or ongoing content.
Yeah.
So,
Ongoing. Yeah,
so I
definitely.
appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think Sure. And I think the states vary pretty dramatically in terms of how much contact is allowed, or in some states they can reverse their decision in the first couple months after birth. And so that would be tough on the adoptive family for sure. But so I think the laws are getting more birth mother centered or focused.
Well, that's interesting. I've worked a lot with children in foster care and have come to really be concerned about the bonding and the attachments of the children, and not treating
Yeah.
them like pieces on a chessboard where you just move them around as if there's
Right.
no implication.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know Molly, who's not able to really participate well with us today, but she has had a stillbirth, and she really wanted to underscore sort of the trauma from a stillbirth. And I don't know if
Yeah.
you have more to add in terms of the differences between a stillbirth, abortion, miscarriage. Um,
Well, I think our annotated bibliography on stillbirth specifically is up to probably at least 75 journal articles that we've summarized, and it's definitely a severe trauma. Um, so a lot of what I've looked into personally is in cases of fetal anomaly, and so the mainstream medical profession has advocated that women, and they're told, often pressured to just terminate and quickly for the sake of for their own self, level of potential suffering and for the baby. It's completely mispitched because all of the research shows that women fare best, the families fare best when they continue the pregnancy to natural death. And that might be before the birth or hours shortly after birth. A lot of good data on that. And so stillbirth occurs for, obviously for various reasons. Oftentimes, I don't know if in Molly's situation, she may have believed that, or her baby may have been fully, healthy and not suffering from any major anomaly. It could be a birth issue. When I was pregnant with one of my sons, there was a woman at the doctor's office who was carrying simultaneously with me and her child. She was scheduled for a cesarean, and sadly the the cord wrapped around the baby's neck the night before, and so she had absolutely no preparation for the outcome. And most typically these are wanted pregnancies when the stillbirths occur. And so it is a different dynamic psychologically, and it's absolutely a tragic loss. One other thing I've learned from reviewing the studies on stillbirth and on miscarriage is that they're learning a lot more about prevention, and there's more that can be done to prevent stillbirths, and to be aware of how to help women be aware of when there might be something wrong with their babies, keeping track of fetal movements and so forth. But they are definitely understudied, and the families are on, not just the moms, but how do dads react to stillbirth, how do grandparents, the extended family. So there's a lot of research still to be done with stillbirth and miscarriage. And one of our big questions in starting the Institute was, I really wanted to know, like, what is unique about a loss through abortion compared to a loss through adoption or stillbirth and miscarriage. So we're trying to identify as many studies out there where they have those comparison groups. And oftentimes there will be stillbirth or miscarriage, but I don't think I have yet to see a study that compares psychological outcomes in women who choose abortion versus adoption versus placement for adoption. That is like a missing piece of what's now.
Well, I am just really delighted that you're working on this project and pulling all this valuable information together in one easy place to access. I think that's an incredible resource. Um,
It feels great to do it because for so long I've been aware of the information needs. And I've had lots of requests over the years. If a case comes up or an article comes out on the other side claiming abortion is benign or healthy, immediately lots of groups want an analysis of that study to get it into the news. And I've noticed in working with lawyers, I've probably been on at least 30 cases as an expert witness. And I know that they often need to get up to speed very, very quickly. And they often have great questions too. Just recently with the Missouri case, the lawyers were interested in the siblings. When there's the choice to abort, how are the siblings impacted? That realize and the parents of the child who chooses abortion. How are they impacted? Especially since with an adolescent, often those parents play a role in pressuring. And so how does that impact them long term when they realize that they were part of the decision to end the life of a grandchild? And so there's very interesting questions looking at the whole family and at the community that supports all of those.
So do you know Dr. Philip Ney?
Yes, I actually had some correspondence with him back probably, I think it was around 2010. And I know that his research looked at the association between abortion and child maltreatment, looking at abuse of later born children. And we actually published a couple studies that have shown a similar association, that when some women who have chosen to abort, oftentimes will, not every time, and certainly not even most of the time, but some women will experience difficulty bonding with later born children, and there may be neglect or abuse with later born children that has psychologically has some tie to the abortion experience.
Wow. Dr. Coleman, as you're thinking about what you feel like your broad brush of examining all this information, what do you think would be most interesting to our listeners in terms of kind of maybe some surprises that you've learned or in looking at all the research?
Well, I don't know that doing the Institute opened my eyes too much wider, because I've just been aware of just how much suffering there is. There's an enormous amount out there in terms of the women and the men, and so I have learned more about the other forms of loss. But it's just for me, it's affirming. I mean, to know that it's normative. I would say that the data we rely on shows like 30 to 40% of women suffer from an abortion, but I don't believe we've measured all the various ways that it could impact them. The types of measures that are used are typically pretty simplistic, and I believe that experience of an abortion is just as individual as the women who go through them. And so there's a lot to be learned. I think, for so many years, women have suffered in silence. They've been told by the feminists and the mainstream that if they are having problems with what should be a simple procedure, there's something wrong with them. So I think if people really get immersed in the information we have, it'll be very validating for them to realize they're not alone, that there's help, there's empathy, there's compassion. And
so that's good. Thank you for that information. I want to thank you both for myself and for Molly. I know she's disappointed she's not been able to participate with us today, but we certainly thank you. And
oh, you're welcome. I'm happy.